I died on a rainy Thursday evening, my car spinning out of control on that winding mountain road. The last thing I saw was Jason's face in my rearview mirror, that cold smile I thought I'd never see again. The same man who was supposed to marry me in 3 days. The same man who had just told me he was leaving me for his ex-girlfriend Grace. The same man who, I would later discover, had orchestrated my father's arrest and now my death. But somehow, impossibly, I opened my eyes again. Not in a hospital bed, not as a ghost haunting the living, but 3 months before my wedding day. 3 months before everything fell apart. I was back in my childhood bedroom, sunlight streaming through the curtains I remembered picking out when I was 16. My hands were younger, my reflection in the mirror showed a face unmarked by the stress and heartbreak that had aged me in those final months. At first, I thought it was a dream. A cruel joke my dying mind was playing on me. But as the days passed, as I lived through conversations I remembered having, as I watched events unfold exactly as they had before, I realized the impossible truth. I had been given a second chance. A chance to change everything. A chance for revenge. The memories of my previous life crashed over me in waves. Jason Martinez, the man I had loved since college, the man I had supported through his struggling startup years, the man my family had practically adopted as their own son. My father had invested everything into Jason's company, believing in our future together. My mother had planned our wedding with the enthusiasm of someone finally seeing her daughter find happiness. I had given him my trust, my money, my heart, my entire future. And he had repaid me by using my family's connections to build his empire, then abandoning me the moment he no longer needed us. Grace Thompson, his college ex-girlfriend, had returned from studying abroad, and suddenly I became nothing more than an inconvenience. A stepping stone he was ready to discard. In my previous life, I had been too naive, too trusting. When Jason started acting distant, I blamed myself. When he began working late every night, I brought him dinner and tried to be understanding. When he stopped saying he loved me, I convinced myself he was just stressed about the business. Even when I caught him texting someone late at night and he claimed it was just a business contact, I believed him because I wanted to. The truth had only come out 3 days before our wedding. I had gone to his office to surprise him with lunch, using my key to let myself in. That's when I found them. Grace straddling him in his executive chair, her manicured fingers tangled in his hair as they kissed with the passion of long-lost lovers reunited. The wedding invitations we had spent months designing were scattered across his desk, some of them stained with coffee rings, as if they meant nothing at all. When Jason saw me standing there, frozen in the doorway, he didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He simply lifted Grace off his lap, straightened his tie, and said, "Emma, we need to talk." That conversation had shattered my world. He told me he had never stopped loving Grace. That our relationship had been comfortable, convenient, but never the grand passion he had felt for her. He said he was sorry for stringing me along, but Grace was back now, and he had to follow his heart. He made it sound so reasonable, so inevitable, as if my feelings and our 3 years together meant nothing at all. But the worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was what came after. Within days of calling off the wedding, my father was arrested on charges of embezzlement from his own company. Evidence had mysteriously appeared showing that he had been stealing funds for years. It was only later, as I sat in the courthouse watching my father's reputation crumble, that I noticed Jason's satisfied smirk from the gallery. He had used his access to my father's business, gained through our relationship, to plant evidence and frame the man who had treated him like a son. My mother suffered a stroke from the stress. My father went to prison. Our family fortune, everything we had worked for generations to build, was seized by the government. I was left alone, broke, and broken. And through it all, Jason thrived. His company, built on my family's connections and investments, went from strength to strength. He and Grace were featured in business magazines as the power couple of the year. They lived in the penthouse apartment I was supposed to share with him, drove the cars my father's money had helped him buy. I had tried to expose him, tried to tell anyone who would listen about what he had done. But who would believe the desperate ex-fiancé of a successful businessman? I was painted as bitter, delusional, unable to accept that our relationship was over. Even my own friends began to distance themselves, tired of hearing my conspiracy theories about the man they all admired. The final blow came 6 months after the wedding that never was. I was driving home from yet another failed job interview, my car struggling up the mountain road in the rain. I had been getting strange phone calls all week, hang-ups and whispered threats. My apartment had been broken into, though nothing was stolen. I felt like I was being watched, followed, but when I went to the police, they dismissed me as paranoid. That night, as I navigated the treacherous curves of Mountain View Road, I noticed headlights behind me that had been there too long. They stayed exactly the same distance back, matching my speed, following every turn. When I sped up, they sped up. When I slowed down, they did too. Terror crept up my spine as I realized I was being hunted. I tried to lose them, taking sharp turns and pressing my old car to its limits. But whoever was following me knew these roads better than I did. They pulled up alongside me on a straight stretch, and in the brief moment our windows were aligned, I saw Jason's face behind the wheel. Not Grace. Not some hired thug. Jason himself, the man I had once planned to spend my life with, personally ensuring my destruction was complete. Our eyes met for just a second, and I saw no regret there. No hesitation. Just cold calculation, like I was a problem to be solved, a loose thread to be cut. He swerved into my lane, and my car spun out of control, sliding toward the guardrail and the 100-foot drop beyond. My last thought before the world went black was not fear or anger, but a profound sadness that I would never get the chance to make him pay for what he had done. But now I was back, and everything was different. This time, I knew what was coming. This time, I would be ready. This time, I would be the hunter, not the prey. The first thing I did was test whether I was the only one who remembered our previous life. I started dropping subtle references to things that hadn't happened yet, watching Jason's reactions carefully. At first, I thought I was alone in my knowledge. Jason seemed exactly as he had been 3 months before the wedding in my previous timeline, loving, attentive, excited about our future together. He brought me flowers, held my hand during movies, talked enthusiastically about our honeymoon plans. But then I noticed the little things. The way his smile never quite reached his eyes anymore, like he was performing happiness rather than feeling it. The way he checked his phone constantly, angling it away from me when he typed. The way he sometimes looked at me with this strange expression, as if he was trying to figure something out. It was during a dinner at my parents' house that I confirmed my suspicions. My father was discussing a business deal that, in my previous timeline, had gone through the week after my supposed wedding day. I mentioned casually that I thought the other party seemed untrustworthy, that maybe we should be careful about their financial stability. Jason's fork stopped halfway to his mouth, and for just a moment, his mask slipped. I saw recognition in his eyes, followed immediately by calculation. He remembered too. Somehow, impossibly, we had both been given this second chance. But while I intended to use mine for justice, I could see in his eyes that he planned to use his for an even more perfect crime. Over the following weeks, I watched him like a hawk while pretending to be the same trusting fool I had been before. I saw him gradually implementing the same strategies he had used in our previous life, but with small modifications designed to avoid the pitfalls he now knew were coming. He was more careful about hiding his communications with Grace, more subtle about accessing my father's business information, more strategic about positioning himself for maximum gain with minimum risk. The realization filled me with a cold fury that burned brighter than any emotion I had ever experienced. Not only had he destroyed my life once, but given the chance to do it over, he was choosing to destroy it again. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't conflicted. He was simply trying to execute his betrayal more efficiently. That's when I decided that merely stopping him wasn't enough. He needed to experience every ounce of pain he had inflicted on me and more. He needed to lose everything he had gained through his treachery. He needed to understand what it felt like to be betrayed by someone he trusted completely. I began my own preparations, but unlike Jason, I wasn't repeating the same mistakes. I was evolving, learning, becoming someone entirely new. The Emma who had died on that mountain road had been naive and trusting. The Emma who had been reborn was calculating and ruthless. I started by quietly documenting everything. Every secret meeting Jason thought he was hiding, every phone call with Grace he made when he thought I wasn't listening, every file he accessed on my father's computer. I invested in tiny cameras and recording devices, turning our shared apartment into a surveillance network. I hired a private investigator to follow Grace, learning her schedule, her habits, her weaknesses. I began studying Jason's business associates, identifying which relationships were strongest and most vulnerable to disruption. Meanwhile, I played my part perfectly. I was the loving fiancé, excited about our upcoming wedding, blind to any signs of trouble in our relationship. I complimented him on his business successes, supported him through his stressful days, and never questioned why he was working so many late nights. I even helped him pick out a gift for his business associate, Grace, smiling sweetly as I selected the expensive necklace I knew she would be wearing in their secret photographs. The hardest part wasn't the deception itself, but the constant battle against my own emotions. Every time Jason kissed me, I felt sick knowing where his mouth had been. Every time he said he loved me, I wanted to scream that I knew it was a lie. Every time he made plans for our future together, plans I now knew he never intended to keep, I had to fight the urge to confront him immediately. But patience, I had learned, was the most powerful weapon in the arsenal of revenge. Let him think he was in control. Let him believe his plan was working perfectly. Let him get comfortable, confident, careless. The higher he climbed, the more devastating his fall would be. 2 weeks before our wedding, just as in my previous life, Jason began his campaign to distance himself from me. He started picking fights over small things, criticizing choices I made about the ceremony, suggesting that maybe we were rushing into marriage. He was setting up the narrative that would justify his eventual abandonment, making it seem like our relationship was naturally falling apart rather than being deliberately sabotaged. I responded by being even more loving, more accommodating, more desperate to save our relationship. I apologized for things that weren't my fault, begged him to talk to me about what was wrong, promised to change whatever he needed me to change. It was a performance worthy of an award, and it was driving him crazy. He couldn't figure out why his emotional manipulation wasn't working the way it had before. 3 days before the wedding, right on schedule, I surprised him at his office with lunch. I made sure to arrive at exactly the same time I had in my previous life, carrying the same bag of Chinese food, wearing the same dress. I wanted the moment to be as close to the original as possible. I used my key to enter his private office, and there they were, exactly as before. Grace straddling Jason in his leather chair, her designer dress hiked up around her thighs, his hands tangled in her perfectly styled hair. The wedding invitations were scattered across his desk, some stained with coffee rings, treated like garbage. But this time, instead of standing there in shock, I calmly pulled out my phone and began recording. The video quality was crystal clear, capturing not just their physical betrayal but the passionate words they whispered to each other. Grace telling Jason how much she had missed him, how she had never stopped loving him, how she couldn't wait to be free to love him openly. Jason responding that Emma was just a means to an end, that he had never felt for me what he felt for her, that after the wedding he would find a way to divorce me and keep everything my family had given him. They were so lost in each other that they didn't notice me for almost a full minute. When Grace finally opened her eyes and saw me standing there with my phone raised, she screamed and scrambled off Jason's lap. Jason spun around in his chair, his face cycling through surprise, guilt, and then cold calculation. Emma, he said, standing up and straightening his clothes, this isn't what it looks like. I almost laughed at the sheer predictability of his response. Even knowing that I had caught him red-handed, even seeing the camera in my hands, he was still trying to gaslight me. Really? I said, my voice deadly calm. Because it looks like you're cheating on me with your ex-girlfriend 3 days before our wedding. It sounds like you're planning to use me and my family and then discard me once you've gotten what you want. It feels like every word you've ever said to me has been a lie. Grace was frantically trying to fix her hair and makeup, shooting panicked glances between Jason and me. In my previous life, she had been confident, almost smug about stealing Jason away from me. This time, faced with video evidence of their affair, she looked terrified. Emma, please, Jason said, taking a step toward me. You don't understand the whole situation. Grace and I, we have history, but that doesn't mean I don't love you too. I can explain everything if you just put the phone down and talk to me. Love me too? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. How generous of you to love us both. Tell me, Jason, when you were planning to let me in on this arrangement? Before or after our wedding vows? I could see him struggling to find an angle, a way to spin this that would salvage his position. In my previous life, he had been confident during this confrontation because he knew I was emotionally invested in preserving our relationship. He had counted on my love to make me vulnerable to his manipulation. But I wasn't the same broken-hearted girl who had begged him to reconsider. I was someone who had already lived through his betrayal, already suffered the consequences of trusting him. I was someone who had died because of his greed and was now very much alive and very much ready for payback. The wedding is in 3 days, I continued conversationally. I assume you were planning to go through with the ceremony? String me along a little longer while you figured out the best way to maximize your profits from my family's destruction? His face went pale. I was too close to the truth, showing too much knowledge of his real plans. Emma, you're being paranoid, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I made a mistake with Grace. I was confused about my feelings, but I choose you. I choose our future together. How romantic, I said dryly. Nothing says eternal love like having to choose between your fiancé and the woman you were just having sex with in your office. I'm sure that will make a beautiful story to tell our children someday. Grace finally found her voice. Emma, I'm sorry. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. Jason told me you two were having problems, that the engagement was a mistake. Shut up, Grace, Jason snapped, and I saw the first crack in his composure. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. No, please, let her talk, I said pleasantly. I'm fascinated to hear what version of events Jason has been feeding you. Did he tell you that he was just marrying me for my money? That he never loved me at all? That he was planning to divorce me as soon as he had secured his position in my father's company? Both of them stared at me in shock. I had just laid out Jason's entire strategy with surgical precision, things he had never said out loud, plans he thought were hidden in his own mind. How did you? Jason began, then caught himself. How did I know? I finished for him. Lucky guess. Or maybe you're just that predictable. A small, greedy man following a small, greedy playbook. I tucked my phone into my purse, the video safely recorded. Well, this has been enlightening, but I have a wedding to cancel. Guests to notify. Vendors to disappoint. A lifetime of happiness to throw away because my fiancé is a lying, cheating, pathetic excuse for a human being. I turned to leave, but Jason grabbed my arm. His grip was tight, almost painful, and I saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. Emma, wait. You can't just leave like this. We need to talk about this rationally. You're making a huge mistake. Am I? I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. The only mistake I made was believing you were a better man than you are. But don't worry, I won't make that mistake again. I pulled free of his grip and walked out of his office, leaving him standing there with his lies and his mistress and his ruined plans. Behind me, I could hear them starting to argue, Grace demanding to know why he had lied to her about the state of our relationship, Jason trying to salvage the situation and failing miserably. But I wasn't done. Not even close. That was just the opening move. I drove straight to the country club where our wedding reception was supposed to be held. The venue was beautifully decorated, exactly as my mother and I had planned. White roses and baby's breath everywhere, elegant table settings for 200 guests, a string quartet tuning their instruments for the rehearsal that was supposed to happen in 2 hours. I found the wedding coordinator and informed her that there had been a change of plans. Instead of a wedding rehearsal, we would be hosting a rather different kind of gathering. I asked her to contact all the guests and inform them that there would be an important announcement at the scheduled time, but that the nature of the event had changed. Most people, assuming it was some kind of surprise or last-minute change of venue, agreed to come anyway. Next, I called my parents. My father was in his office at the company headquarters, probably completely unaware that his future son-in-law was planning to frame him for embezzlement. My mother was at home, putting the finishing touches on her mother-of-the-bride outfit. "Darling, you sound upset," my mother said when she heard my voice. "Is everything all right? Are you having pre-wedding jitters?" "Mom, I need you and Dad to meet me at the country club. Something has happened, and I need to talk to both of you before tonight's event." "What kind of something?" My father's voice came through the phone. He had picked up the extension in his office, ever the multitasker. "The kind of something that changes everything," I said. "Just trust me, please. Can you be there in an hour?" They agreed, confusion clear in their voices but unwilling to question their daughter's judgment 3 days before the most important day of her life. At least, what they thought was going to be the most important day of my life. I spent the next hour making phone calls. I contacted every major business associate of my father's, every family friend, every relative who was supposed to attend the wedding. I told them all the same thing: there had been an important development, and their presence was requested for a special announcement. Most of them assumed it was some kind of surprise addition to the wedding festivities. I also made one very special call to someone who wouldn't be expecting to hear from me, Richard Blackwood, the CEO of Rankshire Corporation. In my previous life, Jason had managed to secure a major contract with Rankshire about 6 months after our wedding was supposed to have taken place. It had been the deal that really launched his company into the big leagues, the foundation of his business empire. Richard was old-fashioned, the kind of man who valued honor and integrity above all else in his business dealings. "Mr. Blackwood," I said when his secretary put me through, "this is Emma Patterson. I believe you knew my grandfather, Charles Patterson, when you were both starting out in the business world." "Emma." "Of course, Charlie's granddaughter. I heard you were getting married this weekend." "Congratulations, my dear. Actually, that's what I'm calling about. There's been a development that I think you should know about, particularly given your company's interest in working with Jason Martinez's firm. Would you be able to join us at the Hillcrest Country Club this evening? I promise it will be worth your time." Richard was intrigued enough to agree, and I made sure he understood that discretion was appreciated until the announcement was made. By the time my parents arrived at the country club, I had transformed what was supposed to be our wedding rehearsal into something completely different. The flowers were still beautiful, the setting still elegant, but the atmosphere had changed entirely. Instead of celebration, there was tension in the air. Instead of joy, there was anticipation of something darker. "Emma, sweetheart, what's going on?" my mother asked as soon as she saw me. "You look different. Harder somehow." "I feel different," I admitted. "I feel like I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time in years." My father was studying the gathering crowd with the sharp eyes of a businessman who had built an empire through careful observation. This doesn't look like a wedding rehearsal. This looks like something else entirely. It is something else, I confirmed. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you noticed anything strange about Jason's behavior lately? Anything that made you uncomfortable or suspicious? My father frowned, considering the question seriously. There have been a few things. He's been asking a lot of questions about the company's financial structure, wanting access to files that aren't really his business. When I questioned him about it, he said he was trying to understand how to integrate his business with ours after the wedding. It seemed reasonable at the time, but something felt off about it, I finished. Yes, my father admitted. Something felt off. Why? What has he done? Before I could answer, Jason arrived. He had clearly spent the drive over trying to figure out how to handle the situation, probably calling Grace to coordinate their stories. He walked into the country club with his usual confident stride, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes swept the room trying to assess what I had planned. He approached my parents and me with a smile that didn't quite hide his anxiety. Emma, honey, I'm so glad you're here. We really need to talk about what happened at the office. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Oh, there's been a misunderstanding, I agreed. But I don't think it's the kind you mean. More guests were arriving now. Jason's parents, looking confused about why their son seemed so tense. My extended family, wondering why the bride looked more like she was attending a funeral than a celebration. Business associates, drawn by curiosity and the promise of an important announcement. And then Grace walked in. I had been wondering if she would have the nerve to show up, and apparently she did. She had changed clothes since the office encounter, now wearing a conservative dress that was probably meant to make her look innocent and apologetic. But her eyes kept darting between Jason and me, and I could see her hands shaking slightly. Jason's face went white when he saw her. Grace, what are you doing here? You told me to come, she said, confusion clear in her voice. You said Emma wanted to talk to all of us together, to work things out. I hadn't told Grace to come. Which meant Jason had, probably hoping to control the narrative by having her present to support whatever story he had concocted. It was exactly the kind of manipulative move I had expected from him. How thoughtful of you to invite her, Jason, I said sweetly. I'm sure everyone here will be very interested to meet your business associate. By now, the crowd had gathered and was watching our interaction with growing fascination. Richard Blackwood was standing near the back, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. My parents flanked me on either side, sensing that something momentous was about to happen. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the sound system we had installed for the wedding reception. The same speakers that were supposed to play our first dance song were now going to serve a very different purpose. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room, thank you all for coming. I know you were expecting a wedding rehearsal, but I'm afraid there's been a change of plans. Instead of celebrating the beginning of a marriage, we're here to witness the end of a relationship built on lies. A murmur went through the crowd. Jason took a step toward me, panic finally breaking through his composure. Emma, please, don't do this. Whatever you think you know, you're wrong. We can work this out privately. Privately? I repeated. Like the private meetings you've been having with Grace? Like the private plans you've made to use my family and then discard us? Like the private way you've been stealing from my father's company to benefit your own? The room went dead silent. My father's face had gone pale, and I saw understanding dawning in his eyes. I think everyone here deserves to know exactly who Jason Martinez really is, I continued, before they decide whether to do business with him, associate with him, or trust him with their daughters. I pressed play on my phone, and Jason's voice filled the room, crystal clear through the high-quality sound system. The recording from his office, every word of his conversation with Grace preserved in perfect detail. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Gasps from the crowd, my mother's hand flying to her mouth, my father's face hardening into a mask of cold fury. Richard Blackwood's expression shifted from polite interest to disgust. Jason's own parents looked like they had been physically struck. But the audio was just the beginning. As Jason's recorded voice finished explaining how he planned to divorce me and keep everything my family had given him, I switched to the video. The large screen that was supposed to display our wedding photos instead showed Jason and Grace in his office chair, their passion evident and undeniable. Grace let out a sob and fled toward the exit, but the damage was already done. Everyone in that room now knew exactly what kind of man Jason was, what kind of business partner he would make, what kind of person they had almost welcomed into their social circle. Jason stood frozen in the center of the room, all eyes on him, his lies exposed for everyone to see. He tried to speak, to offer some explanation, but no words came out. What could he possibly say? The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, recorded in his own voice and captured by his own actions. The wedding, I announced to the silent room, is cancelled. The engagement is over. And as of this moment, my family's financial support for Jason's company is completely withdrawn. My father stepped forward, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. Mr. Martinez, you are no longer welcome in my home, my business, or my family. Any contracts between our companies are terminated immediately. Any investments my family has made in your ventures are to be repaid in full within 30 days. Richard Blackwood was already walking toward the exit, pulling out his phone as he went. I knew he was calling his office to cancel any potential deals with Jason's company. Other business associates were following his lead, their faces showing the kind of disgust reserved for the most fundamental betrayals of trust. Jason finally found his voice, but it came out as a desperate whisper. Emma, please. I know how this looks, but I can explain. I love you. I've always loved you. Grace, she doesn't mean anything to me. She's just what, Jason? I asked, my voice echoing in the nearly empty room. Most of the guests had left, unable to stomach the scene any longer. Only my immediate family and Jason's parents remained. She's just the woman you've been sleeping with behind my back. The woman you told you loved more than me. The woman you planned to be with after you finished using me. Jason's mother was crying quietly, her dreams of a successful daughter-in-law crumbling before her eyes. His father looked like he wanted to disappear entirely, the shame of his son's actions written clearly across his face. Son, Jason's father said quietly, what have you done? But Jason wasn't listening to his parents. His eyes were fixed on me with an expression I had never seen before. Not love, not regret, not even anger. Something colder and more dangerous. You think you're so clever, he said, his voice low and menacing. You think you've won something here. But you have no idea what you've just cost yourself. What you've cost your family. The threat was clear, and I felt a chill of recognition. This was the same look he had given me on that mountain road in my previous life, the cold calculation of a man who saw people as obstacles to be removed. Is that a threat, Jason? I asked, making sure my voice was loud enough for everyone remaining in the room to hear. He caught himself, glancing around at the witnesses, and forced his expression back into something resembling civilized disappointment. Of course not, he said. I'm just disappointed. I thought we meant more to each other than this. I thought you would at least give me a chance to explain before you destroyed everything we've built together. Everything we built? I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. You mean everything you stole? Every connection you exploited? Every trust you violated? Every lie you told to get what you wanted? I walked closer to him, close enough that only he could hear my next words. I know exactly what you are, Jason. I know exactly what you're capable of. And I'm ready for whatever comes next. His eyes widened slightly, and I saw a flicker of uncertainty. He was beginning to understand that this version of Emma was not the same woman he had manipulated so easily before. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of consequences. Jason's company, suddenly cut off from my family's financial backing and connections, began to struggle immediately. Contracts fell through, investors pulled out, employees started looking for other jobs. The video of his betrayal had spread through our social and business circles like wildfire, destroying his reputation and credibility. Grace had fled back to her parents' house in another state, apparently unable to face the shame of being exposed as the other woman. She sent Jason a letter breaking off their relationship, saying she couldn't handle the scandal and wanted nothing more to do with him. Even his affair partner had abandoned him when the going got tough. But I wasn't satisfied with simply ruining his business and social standing. I wanted him to understand exactly how it felt to be completely powerless, to have everything you cared about stripped away by someone you had trusted. I began systematically dismantling every aspect of the life he had built on my family's foundation. I contacted every vendor he worked with, every client he served, every partner he depended on. I didn't have to lie about him or exaggerate his crimes. I simply told them the truth about his character and let them draw their own conclusions about whether they wanted to continue doing business with him. The response was swift and brutal. In the business world, reputation is everything, and Jason's was now toxic. Companies that had been eager to work with the promising young entrepreneur suddenly found reasons to terminate their contracts. Banks that had been willing to extend credit began calling in their loans. Investors who had seen potential in his business model decided to put their money elsewhere. Within a month, Jason's company was hemorrhaging money and talent. He was forced to lay off most of his employees, sell his fancy office space, and move into a cramped shared workspace. The penthouse apartment he had been so proud of was repossessed by the bank. The expensive cars, the designer clothes, the lifestyle he had built on the foundation of my family's trust and support, all of it was gone. But even as his world crumbled around him, Jason refused to accept responsibility for his actions. Instead, he became increasingly desperate and dangerous. He started calling me dozens of times a day, leaving voicemails that ranged from pathetic pleas for forgiveness to barely veiled threats. He showed up at my apartment building, my workplace, my parents' house, trying to force confrontations that I refused to engage in. One evening, as I was leaving the office where I had started working for one of my father's competitors, I found Jason waiting by my car in the parking garage. He looked terrible, unshaven, wearing wrinkled clothes, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and desperation. "Emma," he said as I approached, "we need to talk." "No, we don't," I replied calmly, pulling out my phone. "We have nothing to say to each other. And if you don't leave me alone, I'm calling the police." "The police," he laughed bitterly. "Right, because you're such an innocent victim in all this. You destroyed my life, Emma. Everything I worked for, everything I built, gone because you couldn't handle the truth about us." "The truth?" I stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "The truth is that you're a liar, a cheater, and a thief. The truth is that you used my family to get what you wanted and then planned to discard us when we were no longer useful. The truth is that you're exactly the kind of man who would ruin innocent people to serve your own greed." His face contorted with rage, and for a moment I thought he might actually try to physically attack me. But then he seemed to remember where we were, the security cameras recording our conversation, the potential witnesses. "You think you know everything," he said instead, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You think you're so smart, so prepared. But you have no idea what's coming for you. What I'm capable of when I have nothing left to lose." This was it. The same threat pattern from my previous life, the same escalation toward violence when his manipulation failed. But this time, I wasn't a naive victim. This time, I was ready. "Is that another threat, Jason?" I asked, making sure to speak clearly for the security cameras. Because it sounds like you're planning to hurt me if I don't give you back the life you never deserved in the first place. He stepped closer, and I could smell the alcohol on his breath. You ruined everything. My company, my reputation, my future. Grace won't even take my calls anymore. My own parents are ashamed of me. All because you couldn't just accept that I didn't love you the way you wanted me to. No, I said firmly. All because you're a sociopath who destroys everything he touches. All because you made the choice to betray people who loved you. All because you're too small and pathetic to build anything real on your own. That hit home. His face went white with fury, and his hands clenched into fists. But before he could do anything he might regret, security guards appeared, drawn by the sound of our raised voices. Is everything all right here, miss? One of them asked, eyeing Jason suspiciously. Just fine, I said sweetly. Mr. Martinez was just leaving. Permanently. Jason stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. The desperate ex-boyfriend was gone, replaced by something much more dangerous. Something that reminded me of the man who had run me off that mountain road. This isn't over, Emma, he said quietly. Not by a long shot. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had died once because of his threats, and I wouldn't make that mistake again. 2 weeks later, Jason made his final, desperate move. I was walking to my car after dinner with friends when 3 men jumped out of a van and grabbed me. They dragged me into the vehicle, bound my hands, and covered my head with a hood. I couldn't see where we were going, but I could hear them talking in hushed voices about their instructions. They drove for what felt like hours before finally stopping in what sounded like an abandoned warehouse district. They hauled me out of the van and threw me to the ground, tying me to a chair in what appeared to be an empty building. I sat there in the darkness for maybe 30 minutes before I heard footsteps approaching. Then the hood was pulled off my head, and I found myself face to face with Jason. But he wasn't alone. Grace was there too, looking terrified and guilty. Surprised to see me? Jason asked with a cold smile. Or maybe you're wondering about Grace. See, it turns out she's been having some financial difficulties since her association with me became public knowledge. Lost her job, can't find another one. Amazing how quickly people can be motivated to help an old friend when they're desperate enough. Grace wouldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry, Emma. I never wanted it to go this far. But Jason said if I helped him, he could make all the problems go away. Problems he created, I pointed out. How poetic. Jason walked closer, and I could see the madness in his eyes. This wasn't the calculated businessman I had once known. This was someone who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. Here's what's going to happen, he said. You're going to call your father and tell him you've realized you made a terrible mistake. That you want to reconcile with me, that you're begging him to restore his support for my company. You're going to fix everything you broke. And if I refuse? He pulled out a gun, and Grace let out a small whimper of fear. Then you don't leave here alive. And your family will spend the rest of their lives wondering what happened to their precious daughter. I looked at the gun, then back at his face, and started laughing. I couldn't help it, the absurdity of the situation, the poetic justice of it all, was just too perfect. You think this is funny? Jason demanded. Hilarious, I gasped between laughs. You kidnapped me, threatened to kill me, and you think that's going to make me want to help you? You really haven't learned anything, have you? What Jason didn't know was that I had been expecting this exact scenario. The private investigator I had hired months ago wasn't just following Grace, he was monitoring Jason's increasingly erratic behavior. When I hadn't returned home at my usual time, and when my phone's GPS tracker showed I had been taken to this abandoned warehouse, the cavalry was already on its way. I heard the sirens in the distance, growing louder by the second. Jason heard them too. His face went pale, and the gun started shaking in his hand. You set me up. I prepared for you, I corrected. Just like I prepared for everything else you've thrown at me. Did you really think I would walk around unprotected after you'd already threatened me multiple times? The sirens were getting closer, and Grace started crying. Jason, we have to go. We have to run. But Jason wasn't listening to her anymore. His eyes were fixed on me with pure hatred. If I can't have my life back, then you don't get to keep yours. He raised the gun, and for a moment I thought this might be where my second chance ended. But then the warehouse doors burst open, and police officers flooded in, shouting commands and training their weapons on Jason. Drop the weapon. Get on the ground now. Jason spun toward them, the gun still in his hand, and I saw his finger tighten on the trigger. But he wasn't aiming at me anymore, he was pointing it at the officers, his face twisted with desperate rage. The gunshots were deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. Jason's body jerked backward and hit the concrete floor. Grace screamed. The officers continued shouting commands until they were sure the threat was neutralized. I sat there in my chair, hands still bound, watching the blood pool around Jason's body. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret, no sense of completion. Just emptiness where all my rage and hatred had been burning for so long. It took another hour before the police finished processing the scene and released me. Grace was arrested as an accomplice, crying and protesting that she had never meant for anyone to get hurt. The 3 men who had kidnapped me were caught trying to flee the area. Jason's master plan had fallen apart completely, just like everything else he had touched. But as I sat in the police station giving my statement, I realized that Jason's death hadn't given me the closure I had been seeking. Yes, he was gone. Yes, justice had been served. But there were still loose ends, still aspects of his betrayal that had never been fully addressed. Over the following weeks, as the investigation unfolded, more of Jason's crimes came to light. It turned out that his plans for my family had been even more extensive than I had realized. He had been systematically copying financial information from my father's company, preparing to frame him for embezzlement just as he had in our previous life. He had hired people to break into our family home, looking for additional evidence he could plant or steal. He had even been researching ways to cause accidents that would eliminate anyone who might expose his schemes. The police found detailed plans in his apartment, including surveillance photos of me, my parents, and other family members. Maps of our daily routes, schedules of our activities, notes about our security measures. It was the portfolio of a man planning multiple murders, not just a desperate ex-boyfriend trying to win back his former fiancé. When my parents learned the full extent of what Jason had been planning, my mother broke down completely. The man she had welcomed into our family, the man she had been planning to call her son-in-law, had been systematically planning to destroy everyone she loved. How did we miss it? She asked me one evening as we sat in our living room, looking through photo albums from happier times. How did we not see what he really was? Because he was very good at being what people wanted him to be, I said. He studied us, learned what we valued, what we hoped for, and then he became that person. The Jason we loved never really existed. My father was handling the revelations differently. Instead of grief, he felt rage, cold, calculating fury at being so thoroughly deceived. I want to make sure this never happens to another family, he told me. I want everyone to know what kind of monster we almost let into our lives. And so we did. We went public with the entire story, holding press conferences, giving interviews, sharing the evidence of Jason's systematic deception and planned violence. The business community needed to understand how a charming, successful young entrepreneur could hide such a dark and calculating nature. The response was overwhelming. Other people came forward with their own stories of Jason's manipulation and betrayal. Former employees who had been fired for questioning his ethics. Business partners who had been cheated out of their investments. Women who had been manipulated and discarded when they were no longer useful to his ambitions. A pattern emerged of a man who saw other people as tools to be used and discarded, who felt no genuine emotion or empathy, who would destroy anyone who stood in the way of what he wanted. The charming facade had hidden a complete absence of conscience. But even with Jason dead and his crimes exposed, I still felt incomplete. There was one more piece of justice that needed to be served, one more betrayal that needed to be addressed. Grace. She had been released on bail pending her trial for kidnapping and conspiracy. Her lawyer was arguing that she had been coerced, that she was as much a victim of Jason's manipulation as anyone else. The media was portraying her as a tragic figure, a woman whose love had blinded her to her boyfriend's true nature. I knew better. I remembered the passion in her voice when she talked about stealing Jason away from me. I remembered the satisfaction in her eyes when she thought she had won. Grace hadn't been an innocent victim, she had been a willing participant in destroying my life. And there was something else, something I had discovered during my investigation that no one else knew yet. I arranged to meet Grace at a coffee shop near the courthouse where her preliminary hearings were being held. She looked terrible, thin, pale, her designer wardrobe replaced by bargain store clothes. The scandal had cost her everything, just as it had cost Jason. "Emma," she said when she saw me approaching her table. I wasn't sure you would actually come." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted, sitting down across from her. "But there are some things we need to discuss before your trial starts." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she was trying to warm herself, even though it was a mild day. "I know you hate me. I know you blame me for everything that happened. But you have to understand, I loved him. I really, truly loved him." "Did you?" I asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you loved the idea of him. The successful businessman, the wealthy lifestyle, the social status. Did you love the man who was planning to murder innocent people? Did you love the sociopath who saw other human beings as disposable tools?" She started crying, just as I had expected. "I didn't know about any of that. I thought he was just trying to get you back, to fix your relationship. When he asked me to help with the kidnapping, he said it was just to force you to listen to him, to give him a chance to explain. And you believed that kidnapping someone was a reasonable way to fix a relationship?" "I was desperate," she sobbed. "I had lost my job, my reputation, my future. Everyone knew me as the other woman, the homewrecker. I couldn't find work anywhere. Jason said if I helped him, he would take care of me, make sure I was okay." I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us. "Grace, I want you to listen to something." I pressed play, and Jason's voice filled the small space between us. Not the recording from his office that everyone had already heard, but a different conversation, one I had captured just a few days before the kidnapping. "Grace is perfect for this," Jason's voice said clearly. "She's so desperate and stupid, she'll do whatever I tell her. And when it's all over, when Emma is dead and I don't need Grace anymore, well, accidents happen. Two birds, one stone." The second voice on the recording belonged to one of the men who had kidnapped me, the one who had turned state's evidence in exchange for a lighter sentence. "You sure she won't be a problem later? Women like that, they get clingy, start making demands." "She won't be a problem," Jason's voice replied with cold certainty. "Dead women don't make demands." Grace's face went white as she listened. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, sending hot liquid splashing across her legs. But she didn't seem to notice. "He was going to kill me too," she whispered. "Eventually," I confirmed. "Once you had served your purpose. You weren't his beloved ex-girlfriend, Grace. You were just another tool in his toolkit, another disposable person he could manipulate and discard when he was done with you." She sat there in stunned silence, finally understanding the true nature of the man she had claimed to love. Finally realizing how completely she had been used. "But there's something else you need to know," I continued. "Something about your pregnancy. Her eyes snapped to mine, fear and confusion warring in her expression. How did you know you're pregnant? Because I've been having you followed since this whole thing started. Because I know about your visits to the clinic, your consultations with Dr. Rodriguez, your prescriptions for prenatal vitamins. Grace's hands instinctively moved to her still flat stomach, a protective gesture that was already too late. The baby isn't Jason's, is it? I said quietly. The timing doesn't work out. Jason was still with me when you would have conceived. Which means you were sleeping with someone else during your grand passionate reunion. Her face crumpled completely. How could you possibly know that? Because I know exactly when you and Jason started your affair, and I know exactly how far along you are in your pregnancy. The math doesn't lie, Grace, even if you do. She was sobbing openly now, her careful facade finally cracking under the weight of all her secrets. It was a mistake. A stupid, drunken mistake with my ex-boyfriend Marcus. I thought if Jason believed the baby was his, he would leave you and be with me. I thought I could make him love me enough to want a family with me. So you lied to him about the pregnancy, just like you lied to me about your relationship with him. Just like you've been lying to everyone about being an innocent victim in all this. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Here's what's going to happen, Grace. You're going to plead guilty to all the charges against you. You're going to accept whatever sentence the court gives you without complaint. And you're going to disappear from my life permanently. And if I don't? I smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. Then I released this recording to the media, along with the medical records showing that your baby couldn't possibly be Jason's. I let the world know that you're not a tragic victim of love, but a manipulative liar who was willing to trap a man with a pregnancy that wasn't his. I make sure that every potential employer, every potential partner, every person you might ever try to build a life with knows exactly what kind of person you really are. Grace stared at me with a mixture of fear and hatred. You're just as bad as he was. Just as cruel, just as manipulative. Maybe, I said, standing up to leave. But I'm not a murderer. I'm not someone who destroys innocent families for personal gain. I'm just someone who makes sure that people face the consequences of their choices. I walked away, leaving her sitting there among the shattered pieces of her coffee cup and her carefully constructed lies. Behind me, I could hear her crying, finally understanding that her actions had consequences, that her choices had led her to this moment of complete ruin. 3 months later, Grace pled guilty to conspiracy and kidnapping charges. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole in 3. Her baby, when it was born, was placed for adoption. She had finally told Marcus the truth, and he wanted nothing to do with either her or the child. Jason's company was liquidated, its assets sold to pay back investors and creditors. The fancy office building where I had caught him with Grace was converted into low-income housing. The penthouse where he had planned to live his stolen life became someone else's fresh start. My father's business, freed from Jason's parasitic influence, flourished. The employees who had been loyal throughout the scandal were rewarded with bonuses and promotions. The company's reputation for integrity, temporarily tarnished by association with Jason, was restored and strengthened. But for me, the real victory wasn't in seeing my enemies punished or my family's fortunes restored. It was in the quiet moments when I realized I was finally free. Free from the weight of betrayal, free from the burning need for revenge, free from the fear that had dominated my previous life. I still thought about that night on the mountain road sometimes, about the moment when I had looked into Jason's eyes and seen nothing but cold calculation. But now those memories felt like someone else's nightmare, a story I had heard rather than lived. I had been given something incredibly rare, a chance to rewrite my story, to choose a different ending. And I had chosen justice over victimhood, strength over helplessness, truth over comfortable lies. The wedding dress that was supposed to be the centerpiece of my perfect day was donated to a charity that helped other women escape abusive relationships. The engagement ring, which had never really symbolized love but only Jason's claim on my family's resources, was sold and the money given to organizations that supported fraud victims. I kept only one memento from that chapter of my life, the recording device I had used to capture Jason's betrayal. It sat on my desk as a reminder that the truth, however painful, was always preferable to the most beautiful lie. 6 months after Jason's death, I was offered a job with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. My experience in uncovering and documenting complex fraud had impressed the investigators who worked on Jason's case. They thought my insights into how charming sociopaths operated could help them catch other predators before they could destroy more families. It felt like the perfect ending to my story of rebirth and revenge. I would spend my new life protecting other people from the kind of monster Jason had been. I would make sure that other families didn't have to suffer what mine had endured. On my last day at my father's company, as I cleaned out my desk and prepared for my new career, I found a photo that had been tucked away in a drawer. It showed Jason and me at a company party 2 years earlier, his arm around my waist, both of us smiling for the camera. We looked happy, in love, like we had a beautiful future ahead of us. I stared at that photo for a long time, trying to remember what it had felt like to trust him completely, to believe in the life we were supposed to build together. But I couldn't recapture those feelings. That innocent, trusting version of myself was as dead as Jason was. I tore the photo in half and threw it in the trash. Then I walked out of the office and into my new life, carrying nothing from the past except the hard-earned wisdom that had cost me everything to learn. Some people get second chances. Fewer people get the opportunity to use those chances to rewrite their entire story. I had been given both, and I hadn't wasted either gift. As I drove away from my father's building for the last time as his employee, I passed the entrance to Mountain View Road, the winding path where I had died in my previous life, where Jason had arranged my murder and thought he had gotten away with it. I pulled over and sat there for a moment, looking up at the treacherous curves that had once seemed so terrifying. Now they just looked like another road, another choice, another path that could lead anywhere depending on who was making the decisions. Jason had thought he was the author of my story, that he could write my ending to serve his needs. He had been wrong about that, just as he had been wrong about everything else. I was the author of my own story now. And this time, I was determined to write myself a much better ending.